All right, hello, Honors 100. So once again this week, there was not a formal reading assignment assigned for this time. We are going to go back to that mode in next week's virtual class, so be prepared for that process. But I know this workshop process sometimes takes a little bit more mental energy in some ways, depending on how many people are signed up for a given day. It can be a little bit more reading than I traditionally assign. It can also be just a little bit more taxing, thinking ahead about what you might want to discuss, what the strengths, what the challenges for this paper are, what suggestions you might have, so on and so forth. But for today's video lecture, I do have something more substantive I wanted to cover. And this felt like about the right time to start getting into this here. So what I want to talk about today are revision ideas. So again, some of you have already completed your workshop process for your initial research integration and are looking ahead to that research argument essay. And for some of you, you aren't there yet, but you certainly will be before too long. And even in the process of thinking about the initial research integration, it doesn't hurt to already start thinking about revision, especially for those of you who are going on our latest states, because you're going to have the least time available to actually use the feedback you get in that workshop process and from me. So turning in a more complete, a more kind of polished product for the workshop process itself, something you've already revised to some extent, is probably advisable. You're having taken advantage of the extra time you've had at the front end and recognize you have less time on the back end to get your research argument essay into shape. So we're going to talk about some ideas, many of which are not groundbreaking, many of which I imagine you may have heard before. Some of it, though, which might be little tweaks on things that you've heard before, or things that you have maybe heard but never actually tried or took that seriously, I'm going to recommend you consider in this process and just kind of moving forward in your college career. Because again, to put all of this in context, this is an assignment that I'm giving you. We've had a progression of assignments building towards this research argument essay. This isn't the only time in college you're going to be asked to write an essay, though. At minimum, in your time in the honors college, you will have similar assignments that are less kind of scaffolded like this, less kind of built to kind of get to this point, more just you're tasked with writing an essay. And when you get those kind of tasks, one of the big steps that's kind of on you is to then figure out how you're going to plan that process of writing the thing, how you're going to make revision a part of that process. Because I'll be transparent that I know some people do write papers the night before they're due and submit them and even do okay. They even earn reasonable grades. But I'll say for most people, usually that's not their best work if they just wrote it in one night and just went ahead and submitted it. I always advise some degree of having worked ahead, at least had a draft earlier on. So at minimum, you have time to go back and clean up kind of cosmetic things, formatting, typos, that sort of thing. But ideally also to have time to more substantially kind of approach the assignment. So talking about revision ideas, the first one that's I think pretty obvious and I hope everyone would be thinking about is review the feedback that you've received from your peers and from me. So we've had these discussions in class. Hopefully everyone has been taking notes as their actual essay is up for a workshop. So you'll look over those notes. You may not agree with all of it, right? There might be some notes in there where you think the person just didn't read your essay carefully enough or they just were on a different wavelength than you. But a lot of the feedback that we discuss in this process is at least worth considering. Even if you don't ultimately choose to go with specifically what someone suggested, you still likely will have the experience of, if someone pointed out something that was confusing or problematic about part of the essay or an opportunity to expand it, it's probably a place that's worth attention, right? And again, maybe not the solution that your classmate gave you, maybe not even the solution that I personally suggested to you, but something to kind of remedy the issue that we've identified there. Otherwise, though, so again, read the feedback that your peers gave you, that you've taken notes on. Read the feedback, of course, that I gave you, knowing that I'm your audience for the research argument essay. I'm the one who's going to be grading it. So, of course, you want to consider what I thought of the previous draft. Think on a macro scale, right? I think oftentimes when we talk about revision and when students go back to kind of clean up a paper, they're thinking, okay, people didn't understand that paragraph. I'm going to clarify the wording on that paragraph. I'm going to fix all of my misused semicolons and add some commas here and there and call it a day. That's not really revision. That's proofreading, right? That's sort of making baseline corrections based on some edits someone gave you. Thinking on a more macro scale, if you already had a thesis statement and an argument kind of established, was that the right argument to make? Was that one you actually believe or that your research actually supports? Or are there more interesting, especially to you, kind of directions you might be able to take this thing? Other things I'll suggest, read it aloud. I know that this is something you must have heard at some point in your schooling prior to this point. When you read your work aloud, you inevitably catch things that you don't catch just by looking at it on a screen, or especially if you haven't read it over at all. As you're reading it aloud, flag parts that don't sound right? An ideal version of this in my mind is you print out a copy of the paper, you have a pen or a highlighter in hand. As you're reading it aloud, you're marking the places where it just does not sound right. Clearly, you've not gotten the idea across clearly, or you know there's a better way of saying that, or you notice glaring errors, any of that kind of stuff. That can be done digitally as well. I'm a realist. I know not everyone has practical access to a printer, but still, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, whatever you use, there's some function where you can highlight things or make notations to yourself in the margins, leave comments to make sure these are the places you need to go back to kind of clean these things up. Another thing that often happens when you read work aloud is you catch words that you overuse. As an example of this, I discovered in my own undergraduate experience, I use the word though a lot. And it's an appropriate word to use more than once over the course of a 5-page essay, so it's not a wrong word to have in an essay, but I was using it like once every other sentence. And to me, for whatever reason, when I saw it on the page, that just looked natural. That didn't look problematic to me. Reading it aloud, though, I couldn't help but notice, I'm saying though a lot. Right? And anytime you're using a word over and over and over again over the course of a paper, you probably could mix up which word you're using or how you're structuring that sentence to kind of diversify it a little bit more and just make the paper stronger for those purposes. Additionally, having someone else read your work, right? So in a lot of my classes, we do some degree of peer review. We may or may not have opportunities to do that in this class just based on timing and the hybrid nature of this class. But it's a good exercise, I think, just to get some fresh eyes on it before it's my eyes in looking on it. So get that out to somebody else to look at it for you. You could mesh these previous 2 points together as well, as in read it aloud to a partner. And you get some of the benefits of both. Like you can be listening yourself and marking things, but you've also got someone else listening who will have an even more objective ear and can be more objective about pointing out things that don't make sense in that way. Other things you can do, what I call reverse engineering an essay. So what I mean by that is the traditional strategy is you write an outline and use that outline to organize your paper. You can also do this in reverse. So you have a full draft of a paper, go back and do an outline based on what you already have. Like open 2 separate windows of Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever you use, and just have it side by side, create the outline. So you also could handwrite it while you've got the paper on screen. But write down just the general structure of the paper and how it's going. Sometimes looking at kind of that big scale can help you recognize where you're missing stuff or where you've kind of said the same thing more than once, where you don't have enough kind of support to kind of to back something up. And then you have the opportunity after you have that outline to rework the paper. And if you have time, if you have the drive, I promise you this process sounds tedious, but it actually tends to be super rewarding. One approach to revision at this point is you've had your original draft, you've done an outline, you fix the outline, you write a whole nother paper based on that outline. And again, I know that sounds like a lot of work and maybe unnecessarily tedious, but almost always I would suggest the new paper that you've written, because you had the experience of writing the first one, because you have this improved outline to work from, is actually a significantly better paper. So again, you're sort of rewriting the essay based on that. And a related step, something that I tend to suggest to students, that also sounds super tedious, isn't a fun option for revision, but I think tends to be a pretty effective one, is retyping your paper. So you've got the whole draft done. You've done a little bit of proofreading and review of it. You open up again, kind of windows side by side. You print out a copy and you have your computer there, and you literally retype the essay. Now, the reasons why we do that, the biggest thing is it's really hard to retype something that's bad. So if you're retyping a sentence verbatim from what you had in your previous version, and you notice that this is a super run-on sentence, or this is just, really confusing the way that you originally framed it, it's hard to just leave it there, right? You're probably going to fix it. It is probably going to be better because of just even the minor adjustments you made in that process, and you'll catch things that even reading aloud you might not have caught previously. Other things you can do, taking apart your paper. Yeah, I tend to recommend a hard copy for this. It can be done digitally as well. But literally, just cutting up your paper to separate paragraphs, right? And playing around with the process of moving them around and seeing if, was your first instinct for how you organize this thing the best choice, right? Because it might have been a good choice just to get the ideas down, but it might be that at this point you find you can actually organize this thing more effectively or more logically if you did it in a slightly different fashion. Otherwise, these next couple ones are more ones that you can kind of overlap with other strategies I've already mentioned. Looking for moments to explode. Like what are the best paragraphs of your essay? I'm looking at why are they so much better than the other ones, right? And is there an opportunity to expand that and kind of spread that energy more throughout the paper? And on similarly, looking for moments to cut. Right? Are there certain paragraphs that are just not pulling their weight? Maybe you carry something over from the initial artifact analysis just because it was kind of a cool moment of analysis, or you just needed to fill the space for your previous paper. But in your actual argument, it doesn't really add anything. It doesn't actually mean anything in terms of substance for your argument. Maybe you cut that out at this point. Other things you can do, looking for moments to bring your artifact back into the conversation, right? Because for many of you, you've moved well past your artifact at this point to thinking more about the issues or the topics that it brought up for you. Are there opportunities to go back to your artifact and loop in evidence from what you originally observed in that video or that song or whatever you were looking at? Checking that every paragraph has support, right? So support can mean different things. Support can mean that you've applied research. That's kind of the most common example that we tend to use in papers like this. It can mean you've provided evidence from your original artifact. It can be even you have personal evidence, depending on what your argument is. For some of you, that's practical. That actually does fit because you have personal experience that speaks to your topic. But looking to make sure every paragraph has some sort of evidence that's supporting the main points that you're making there. Let's see, looking for moments where, this is related to that, but where you might add research, right? Where moments where it just feels a little bit thin, or where the your original artifact analysis or your experience just aren't really kind of carrying it as well as the other paragraphs in your essay. That can be a useful exercise as well. And it might seem counterintuitive, but something I feel pretty strongly about. Don't worry about the line level edits, the typos, the wording choices that could have been a little better, the punctuation corrections. Worry about that last. Right? And the reason I say that is oftentimes it feels like a final step because it's kind of fine tuning, right? And just kind of getting things perfect. If you do that too early in the process, there's a risk of feeling like you're done before you're really done with the revision process. And alternatively to that, if you do honor the revision process, but you've already done the line level stuff, you're probably going to have to do it again because you've written so much new material and reworked so much of the existing material that you find you actually have to redo all the line level edits anyway. So why do that part twice, right? So that can kind of be a benefit to just hold off until the end, make that the final step kind of in your checklist of things you want to do in the revision process. Okay, so that's all I have. That is certainly not an exhaustive list of ways to approach revision, but I hope that some of this was new for some of you, or at least a different angle on some things you may have heard before. So in the discussion below, I have saved what I'm talking about in discussion till the end of the video in hopes that you all actually watched the video and got to this point. So in the discussion, what I'm going to ask you to do is to share at least one, and feel free to share multiple, but at least one revision technique that you think that you would like to use for your paper. Right. So one that sounds like it fits kind of the process of what your paper kind of requires, where you are with that assignment. One that sounds new to you and kind of fun or sort of interesting that you'd like to give a try. I encourage you to use one of the ones that I've already listed in this video, but also feel free to shoot in different directions. If you have other things that you're thinking about or that you've heard from your previous teachers that work really well for you, by all means, throw them into the discussion here, right? And give your peers that resource as well that they might be able to use to their advantage. But all right, that's all I have for now. Really look forward to our discussion of what you're thinking about for revision below. And also, please feel free to throw in questions below as well about any of this revision stuff or about the assignments and kind of where we are. All right, thank you very much.